Hey there guys, so this video is not really going to be one of my typical classes. It's more of an instructional video, a pose breakdown. So I'm going to be talking about our warrior poses today, warrior 1, warrior 2, and warrior 3. I may not necessarily go in that specific order, but I'll talk about how to get into them, some things to think about. And then you can hopefully apply some of those ideas when you do one of my other videos or take a class, what have you. And keep in mind that as I go through and give some explanations on the poses, there is not one single exact right way to do a pose for every single person, right? Because we're all built very differently as far as our just bone construction, right? And then you factor in differences in muscle strength and flexibility. So it's not going to be an exact measurement in each position, but I'll talk you through how to think about some things to get the most out of your warrior pose experience. Before you get started with these poses, make sure that you have moved around a little bit during the day. It doesn't necessarily have to be you've exercised. I wouldn't do these poses right when you get out of bed, right? Make sure that you're just a little bit warm. So I'm going to start with warrior 1. Warrior 1 is a hips facing forwardish kind of position. We're facing the top of the mat, typically for warrior 1. I'll get into it from down dog and talk about it from there. So from down dog, I'll take the right foot forward first, and I'm going to try to get that all the way up toward my hand. Right, before I come up, I'm going to move the back foot a little bit forward and just a little bit to the left, getting the heel down and angling the toes somewhat forward, not all the way. If the toes are all the way forward, my back heel will probably lift and we want the heel planted. Front knee is bent about over the ankle. Right, so that's how I step into warrior 1 from down dog. My warrior 1 is a little bit shorter than a typical lunge, right? If I were lunging, that foot would be further back, right? So it's a little bit more forward. And that helps me get the heel down all the way. And again, try to be more forward facing with the hips. It does not have to be 100% forward facing. Your back hip may not go all the way forward, and we don't want to force that. We want to pay attention to how the back knee feels, and not force it into a shape that it's really not going to enjoy. All right, as far as the pelvis goes, somewhere more neutral. All right, so a lot of times I see an excessive arch in the low back, right? So we kind of collapse into the front hip and get a little too back bendy here. So think of your tailbone going down toward the floor more. It's not going to go all the way, right? And I'm pressing into the back leg as an anchor, feeling really, really strong in that back leg, rooting into the outer edge of the foot, right? Sometimes that can be tricky if your foot's too far back, right? I see a lot of people collapsing into the arches of their foot and they can't get the back outer edge down all the way. Foot's too far back, right? A little bit forward, a little bit of space, right? And then from there, once we have all that lower body stuff set up, we can take the arms up, right? I just usually keep mine about shoulder width with palms facing in towards each other, arms nice and straight, right? You can go a little bit wider with your arms if that feels more comfortable for your shoulders. Try not to overdo that. And some people you'll see press palms together or do a clasp of some sort, right? Whatever feels good for you is just fine, right? Gaze is straight ahead. Some people like to look up. That hurts my neck, so I just look straight ahead, right? I'll try that on the other side, right? And it may feel a little different from side to side, right? Back foot comes forward and over to the side a little bit, making some space so that I can be more forward facing, right? Maybe not 100%. Back leg well engaged, tailbone down, front knee about over the ankle, arms are up. One variation that you might see coming out of warrior one is humble warrior, where we reach the hands back and interlace the fingers and then fold forward, right? So if we're going into that variation, we're still trying to keep the same warrior one-ness in the position as we add the variation, right? So I'm still planting really well into my back foot, engage to the back leg, same lunge position for the front leg, but adding that fold, right? And if I were gonna come into warrior one from the top of the mat instead of from the back of the mat, right? I'm thinking about the same things. It's a little easier to step back than to step forward. For most of us, it's hard to get that foot all the way forward in down dog, right? So same thing, right? You're stepping a little bit over to the side so that you can, you know, try to get more forward facing with the hips. Yeah? Okay. Since we're in forward facing land here with warrior one, I'll go ahead and go into warrior three next, which is also a forward facing pose where we're facing the top of the mat, right? And the hips are, well, hopefully a little bit more square. That's probably the hardest part for me in warrior three. Typically we don't go right into it from down dog. If I were standing in mountain pose and going into warrior three, right? Basically we're going for the shape of a capital letter T. I'm going to use the wall for help with balance, right? So I'm trying to get my leg up about hip height without letting the hip lift up, right? Trying to keep that level, which is the hard part, right? You'll see lots of different arm positions. Arms forward is probably the most common. I think that's the hardest, honestly. I like hands in prayer or even arms back, right? I keep a little bend in the standing leg so that it helps my glutes kind of fire a little bit more to help with balancing, right? And using a wall like that, again, super helpful for balance. I'll try the other side, right? Again, I'm looking for trying to stay level with the hips. And you might use hands on blocks, right, if you're not close to a wall, right? But I'm trying to think of that lifted leg, right, not being a lifted hip, right? So thinking of angling down with that hip. Working those glutes. Okay, and I sort of always think about those little, I think I remember this from like a Looney Tunes cartoon or something, but the little wooden bird that dips down into the water and comes back up, right? So you're creating that counterbalance as your upper body goes forward and your leg lifts up. And so if you think about that, if you have proportions that aren't matched from the upper half to the lower half of your body, that's gonna make it that much harder, right? If I were coming into warrior three from down instead of up, right? One way I like to do that, right? Getting my torso in place first can sometimes be helpful, right? And I'll just lift a leg until I sort of feel it stop, right? If I'm gonna lift it even higher, that hip is gonna wanna lift, right? So when you feel that sort of, okay, it's there, right? That's your warrior three position. Right, other side. And lifting up until I feel like that's it. My hip is still down, I hope. Feels like it anyway. Right, and sometimes I'll cue to angle the back foot, big toe down, right? If your foot's angled out, your hip is turning out, right? So if your foot's turned out like that, your hip might be a little bit more up, so think big toe down. Okay. Moving on to warrior two, which is probably my favorite warrior pose. It's a little bit friendlier than those other two, I feel like. So to get into warrior two from down dog, all right, I'll get my right foot forward first, right? Warrior two, for me and for most of us, I think can be a little bit longer front to back than warrior one. So I'm gonna keep my back foot not take it forward this time. And instead of stepping it forward and over to the side, I'm just gonna let the heel come down so that my back foot's about parallel to the back of the mat, and I'll come up from here. So, lining up front foot to back foot for warrior two, right? You can try some different things with this. I like how it feels to have my heels lined up. Some people do front heel in line with the middle of the arch of the back foot. To me, that's a little bit more wobbly, right? You're a little bit more on a tightrope. This gives me a little bit more space. Some people like a little wider still than that, right? So this foot might be a little bit more over to give you a little more space from side to side, right? So try those different foot positions and see which one you like best. From there, we reach the arms out, gazes over the front. Fingertips, right? Checking in with the hips. A lot of times I see sassy hips in warrior two, which would look like that, right? Sort of cocked down toward the front hip, right? So think even with the hips, right? Think again like in warrior one, tailbone a little bit more down so that we're not doing a back bend in warrior two, not really a back bend pose. Right, and the arms are active, but we're trying to stay relaxed through the shoulders. All right, I'll try that on the other side. I'll just pivot the back foot in and turn the back foot open. Right, I'll just kind of look in and see. I'm gonna line my heels up because that's how it feels best for me. All right, check it in with the hips. Sometimes it helps to get a little sassy just to see how it feels to sass and then even out, right? So you'll notice in this sort of, it's a side-facing pose, right? My hips are facing more open to the side. And I say more open, right? This back hip, my bone construction will not allow that to go all the way out without this front leg getting kind of weird, right? So see if you can just find a happy medium with it, right? There's no 100% anything for anybody in any of these poses. And one other thing to talk about with your stance for warrior two, right? You'll see in some yoga textbooks that for warrior two, your front thigh should be parallel to the mat, which is a huge deep lunge and probably feels like it's a little bit too much for the vast majority of us. So I tend to not go that deep in my warrior two, but you could if that felt good for you, right? I have trouble keeping the back outer edge of my foot planted when I'm lunging that deeply, right? That might feel okay for you. You can give that a try if you like, right? I like mine just a little bit shorter than that, right? Just lunging just enough, right? One variation that you'll see us go into from warrior two is reverse warrior. So I like to try to keep that warrior two nest, just like for humble warrior, I tried to keep the warrior one nest, the forward facing nest. I like to try to keep it a side facing pose as I add that side bend toward the back leg, right? Trying to stay in the same leg engagement as I was in warrior two, just like warrior one, front knee and a lunge, bending over the ankle, back leg really pressing, right? Back foot about parallel to the back of the mat. Reverse warrior adds a little side bend. And then back to warrior two. So, that's it for those warrior poses. I'd love to hear your feedback and how those go for you. Please let me know. And thanks for watching my warrior pose video today. I look forward to practicing with you again really soon. Namaste.